Chapter 10. Dean didn't answer when I called. I tailed Leah to the church's front office, but once she'd been directed to the youth area where Kelly's friends, or possibly her friends, were setting up for the vigil, I peeled off and stepped back outside. In all likelihood, most of Kelly's social group still believed that she had killed herself. I knew better. Standing with my feet on solid ground, I stared up at the steeple. The sky was dark enough to send a shiver down my spine. With or without Dean, there was no time to spare in stepping into the unsub's mind. You know your way around this church well enough to know how to get up to the steeple. Did you know Kelly, too? Did she trust you? As a profiler, my most important task was to separate the parts of a murder that were incidental from the parts that signified something specific about the killer. To the extent that a murder had been planned, the question morphed. Which parts of the plan were necessary? Which parts were required only to fulfill your needs? With what little I knew, I couldn't begin to guess motive yet. Maybe the killer had hated Kelly, or been fixated on her for some time. Maybe her recent actions had drawn attention. Based on the way Kelly's parents had staunchly insisted that what happened to the Summers boy was not Kelly's fault, it was also possible that some people had blamed her for her classmate's suicide. Maybe the suicides did nothing more than provide you convenient cover for Kelly's death. Or maybe, in your mind, they're connected. As I addressed the killer, I couldn't even rule out the possibility that Kelly's death had been unplanned, that she'd climbed the steeple of her own volition, for her own reasons, and the killer had followed and acted on impulse. There were too many variables. To sort through them, and I had to sort through them now, not later, I needed to concentrate on what I knew to be true. There were 3 elements to any murder: the victim, the location, and the method of killing. I knew all 3, and that was a start. Victim. You chose Kelly. Why? That question could cycle too easily right back to motive, so I tried again. Why this girl? What was it about her that got your attention? Did you see the Kelly the world saw? Homecoming court and Ivy League and standing dead center in every picture? Or did you know the real Kelly? She was vulnerable. Most people didn't see that. Did you? I rolled that question over in my mind. Did she remind you of someone? Or was this about her? Did she do something? Did you hate her? Did she trust you? That was too many questions and not enough answers, so I turned to the next element of the crime. Location. You killed her at a church. I found myself pacing around the base of the building, my face tilting toward the sky the way Mackenzie's had, back at the lighthouse. Churches are holy, sacred. You killed this girl on holy ground. What did that say about our killer? For some, it might have been about sending a message, but not for an unsub who'd never intended for anyone to know that the victim had been murdered. If you chose the church, you didn't choose it to send a message. You chose it for you, either for your convenience or your satisfaction. Are you religious? Or would any structure this tall do? There was something about heights. Even standing with my feet on the ground, looking up at the way the steeple stretched into the sky, I felt it. The higher you go, the farther away the rest of the world feels. It was just you and Kelly up there. Just Kelly and you. On the brink of something, but unable to push through, I tried Dean a second time, and this time he answered. Cassie. Hearing him say my name sent a wave of something like relief, with a side of anticipation, through my body. Strangling someone is intimate, I said, well aware that was not the way that normal girls started conversations with their boyfriends. Shooting someone is not, but pushing them off a building? Pushing involves physical contact. You touched her. Did you want to? Either way, given the lack of defensive wounds, it had been quick. Cassie. Dean said my name again, and this time I heard something different in his tone. The two of us were used to profiling in tandem. I profiled in second person. He profiled killers in first. He wasn't profiling anyone or anything now. Briggs sent Sloan some files, I said, taking a step back. I'd assumed that Sloan had shared them, that Dean would have started sorting through them as surely as Michael, whose emotion reading ability was of the most use in person, had taken off. I've seen the files, Dean told me. All 3 of them. That gave me pause. All 3? Sloane's conclusion had been clear. The first 2 victims had jumped. That was why we were focusing on Kelly and the church. I'm sorry I missed your call, Dean continued. I was getting ready to return it. I just wanted to be sure first. Sure? I asked, wishing he were here, that I could see him, touch him, get a preview of some kind as to what he was thinking. Look at the first file, Dean said. The photos of the victim taken at the scene. I set my phone to speaker and went back to the original email from Briggs, pulling up the file. The pictures, the body. At first, all I saw was blood and bone, a body mangled on the rocks. I knew from Mackenzie that the first 2 teens had jumped from a cliff, but that wasn't visible in the picture. Do you see it? The moment the question exited Dean's mouth, I did. Beside the body, a foot or 2 removed, and even with the victim's neck, was a plant of some kind, caught between 2 rocks. At first glance, it looked like it was growing there, but something about the positioning made me question that conclusion. I see it. Have you asked Sloan to ID the plant? Dean finished. She says it's from the genus Hedera, ivy. She's in the process of identifying the exact species, but she gave it a 98.7% chance that it doesn't grow naturally nearby. The fingers on my right hand tightened around the phone. If the plant didn't grow nearby, that meant that it had been left there, tucked between 2 rocks. Tell me what you're thinking, Dean murmured. Something in his tone made me think that the first time I'd called, he'd been buried too deep in the unsub's mind to hear the phone ring. He wanted to know if he'd gone too deep, if I saw it too. The first 2 victims weren't murdered, I said. Sloan said they jumped. And yet, without being prompted to, I downloaded a photograph of the second suicide victim. Scanning the surroundings didn't reveal any plants, flowered or otherwise, among the rocks, but there was a small collection of stones, 4 of them, clustered a foot or 2 to the right of the victim's neck. Mourning, I said, parsing through it out loud. Or marking. I paused, then went ahead and took that logic one step further. Someone found the bodies before the police did and marked the sites. Were you the one who found them? Did you know them? Mourn for them? What are the chances of the same person finding both suicide victims? I asked. The markers might have been different, but the positioning was the same. Dean's response was a long time in coming. The chances are good, he said finally, his voice reverberating in my bones. If I watched. You. There have been so many over the years. Kelly was different. Kelly was not your best work. You failed her. You won't fail again. Chapter 11. How could our unsub have known in advance that there would be something to watch? I asked. Once was a coincidence. Twice was a pattern. In our line of work, patterns had meaning. Sometimes they told us about a suspect's routine, where they lived, how they spent their time, the radius in which they traveled. But sometimes, a pattern told us about the killer's need. "I need to watch," Dean said, his words echoing my thoughts almost exactly. "The last moments, the decisions." "How do you know?" I asked again, the question catching in my throat. "How did you know those teens were going to jump? Why were you there?" "To watch." The answer to the second question drowned out all possible responses to the first. "To mourn." Typically, any indicators of mourning, flowers, dressing the victim, covering the face, were signs that an unsub felt some degree of remorse. The posthumous honoring of a victim was an expression of complex emotion, one that allowed a killer to simultaneously make amends and retell the story of the death in their own head. "You didn't kill the first two," I said, feeling Dean's presence on the other end of the phone line as surely as if he'd been there in person. "They killed themselves. They jumped." "Kelly didn't," Dean said, his voice throaty and low. "She didn't jump." "You didn't mark her body." Those two facts were enough of a divergence from the voyeur's MO that I should have wondered if we were talking about two different people. But the alternative was that we were dealing with escalation. "You're the watcher. You serve as witness." But Kelly didn't go over the edge of her own volition. "What if she was supposed to?" I asked suddenly. "What if Kelly was supposed to jump?" I'd wondered earlier what the killer had seen in Kelly. "She was vulnerable," I told Dean. I closed my eyes for a moment, then shifted to Kelly's perspective. I was vulnerable. I climbed the steeple willingly. I hurt. Despite Kelly's father's objections to the contrary, he'd believed she'd killed herself. "You were in pain," Dean said simply. "And now you're not." Maybe I'd been looking at the markers, ivy, stone, all wrong. Maybe they weren't signs of mourning or remorse. Maybe they were symbols of honor, release. "I trusted you," I said, still trying to view this from Kelly's perspective. "I either told you what I was planning, or," Dean replied softly, "it was my idea." How could an unsub have known in advance that two teens were going to kill themselves? Either they told you, or it was your idea. Standing outside the church, looking up, it was too easy to picture Kelly up there, staring down. "I didn't jump," I said, speaking on her behalf. Maybe I wanted to. Maybe I thought about it. But it didn't feel right. I'd recognized earlier that Kelly wouldn't have wanted a death that would mangle her body beyond recognition. Was that what she'd realized up on the steeple? "I didn't jump," I said fiercely. "I didn't want to." "You were in pain," Dean repeated what he'd said earlier. "And now you're not." "Is that what you think this is?" I asked. "Not murder, but mercy?" "There's something holy about what I do," Dean replied steadily. I couldn't stay in Kelly's perspective any longer. "Something holy," I echoed Dean, "about the height and the fall." If jumping to her death hadn't been Kelly's idea, if someone had pushed her toward it, that suggested the manner of death held significance to the unsub instead. You planted the idea in her head. You encouraged it. And when she couldn't do it... "It's a sacrament," Dean said. "A rite." I thought of Kelly, looking down at the world from high up on a church. She hadn't wanted to do it. She'd chosen not to. "Kelly didn't want your mercy," I said lowly, addressing the nameless, faceless killer with that much more vehemence than before.
"But,"
Dean countered,
"she needed it."
For the longest time, he was silent on the other end of the line, and I stood outside the church, my face chapped from wind, my limbs like deadweight on my body as I sorted through all I knew.
"What have you read?"
Dean asked me finally, fully himself and not speaking for the killer anymore.
"About assisted suicide."
The question took me by surprise, but it shouldn't have. If our unsub had witnessed the first 2 suicides, if he or she had known they were going to happen, had in any way encouraged them, that could be seen as assistance. And Kelly? She'd been assisted right over the edge.
"What do you know about mercy killings?"
Dean said, amending the term he'd used before.
"So-called angels of death typically begin with a loved one, often one who has asked for assistance. But after that..."
He trailed off for a moment.
"They don't stop, and their victims aren't always willing."
"Mercy," I said, latching on to part of what Dean had said. "Even for the unwilling. Like Kelly." "What's the typical profile for a mercy killer?" I asked, trying to view this objectively, trying not to think what Kelly's final moment, rushing toward the ground, realizing she'd been pushed, would have been like.
"Most often," Dean said, "you'd be looking at someone whose occupation grants them access to victims whose health has degraded to the point that they cannot fight back."
Kelly had been young and healthy, physically. Mentally, however, she'd struggled. I hadn't spent enough time on the other 2 files to know anything about the first 2 victims, but given that they had jumped, I had to assume that they'd had that much in common with Kelly. Young, vulnerable, in pain. We were looking for someone with access to vulnerable teenagers, most likely an adult, a teacher, a volunteer, a parent, a coach, someone these kids trusted, someone who could lead them right up to the brink and watch them fall. "A mercy killer needs more than access," I said. "They need a skill set that will allow them to go undetected."
"Right," came Dean's reply. "In most cases, you'd expect some form of medical training."
Medical training. Access. "Have you ever heard of an angel of death who preys on people with mental health issues?" I asked Dean.
"No."
He hesitated, just for a moment.
"But I'd give it 10-to-1 odds that the person who fits that particular profile has some kind of background in the mental health field."
We were looking for someone with access to vulnerable teens, someone with experience in mental health, someone, I thought, with psychological training, who knows exactly what to say to push someone over the edge. I barely felt the first drop of rain, or the second. I could see the lighthouse in the distance, and suddenly I flashed back to the moment when I'd been close, so close, to talking Mackenzie down from the ledge. "Dean," I said suddenly, "our killer likes to watch." My boyfriend replied, but I couldn't hear him. I couldn't form another coherent sentence, because all I could think, as the sky opened up and rain came down in sheets, was that Mackenzie was still out there on that ledge. Right where you want her.
"You. Poor little Mackenzie. What she's been through, what she's suffered. She needs help. Your help. Release."
Chapter 12. I took off running. Cape Roan was a small town. The church and the lighthouse were separated by a matter of blocks. "Call Leah," I told Dean. "Or Michael. Tell them we have to get back to Mackenzie." I didn't wait for a response. I just hung up and kept running. I I never should have left. It was part and parcel of being a profiler that I tended to get absorbed in cases. I'd been so focused on Kelly and her killer, but I never should have taken my eyes off Mackenzie. From the moment I'd realized that this killer liked to watch. I should have known you'd be there, watching. The lighthouse was closer now, but not close enough. My sides were already starting to burn, my lungs beginning to tighten like a vice in my chest. But I managed to keep enough presence of mind to give my cell phone a verbal command. "Call Celine!" She answered, and I stopped running, just long enough to catch my breath, long enough to ask, "Mackenzie?" "Everything is fine here." Celine's response was measured, unnaturally so. "The rain is a problem, but Mackenzie knows that, and we're discussing next steps." I was soaked. Mackenzie must have been too. And the ledge. "You need to get her in," I told Celine. "And if you can't, you need to get her psychologist out of the room, now." As I reached the lighthouse, I could hear a voice ringing in my mind. "You can trust them, Mackenzie. We've talked about trust, haven't we?" I thought the woman treating Mackenzie was incompetent. She'd said exactly the wrong thing at precisely the right moment to throw a kink in the works. If she'd kept her mouth shut, I could have talked Mackenzie down. Maybe that was the point. Thunder crashed, loud enough to jar my bones, but all I could think about was getting to Mackenzie. Celine and our suspect met me halfway up the lighthouse stairs. "Agent Delacroix said you needed a consult?" The psychologist didn't sound annoyed, but her tone was brisk. "Something about adolescent depression?" I glanced over at Celine. Apparently, she'd had to think on her feet to get the woman out of the room without causing a scene. Point, Agent Delacroix. "You should get back to Mackenzie," I told Celine. "Let her know that Leah and I held up our end of the deal. She can come in." "Tell her," I didn't say, "that I know who killed Kelly." The psychologist stiffened. "If you're going to be talking to Mackenzie," she told Celine, "I should really be there." I stepped up, coming even with the woman. "Please," I said. "This won't take long, and it's urgent." I could feel Celine looking at me. I was asking her to leave me alone with a woman I believed to be a killer. Under normal circumstances, she would have refused. Based on protocol, she should have. But with the storm, with Mackenzie still out there, protocol was the least of our worries. "Don't worry," Celine told me, even as her eyes said, "Be careful. We'll bring Mackenzie in." Celine returned the way she'd come, leaving me alone with the suspect. Now I just had to keep the suspect occupied long enough for Celine and the others to talk Mackenzie down. Without interference this time. Also, I thought, hyper-aware of the space between my body and the killer's next to me, I have to keep you talking long enough for my backup to arrive. "We're trying to get a handle on the motive behind the first 2 suicides," I said, wishing Leah were here to sell the lie for me. "Is your practice focused on children Mackenzie's age and younger, or do you treat older adolescents as well?" "I primarily work with teenagers," came the impatient response. "Mackenzie was referred to me by a colleague several months back. I'm afraid that without an in-depth look at your files, I cannot comment on the specific cases you're interested in. I can say, however, that children and adolescents have emotional lives every bit as complex as that of adults. Teenagers are individuals, not statistics. I could no more talk to you about a unified motive behind adolescent suicide than I could were we discussing adults." "I understand," I said, also comprehending that unless I wanted to turn this into a confrontation, sans backup, I needed to give her something to stay for. "You're drawn to pain. People with scars that run deep, the vulnerable ones, in need of your mercy." It wasn't that long ago, I said, laying the trap, that I was a teenager myself. There was a moment's pause, during which I registered exactly how narrow the stairs we were standing on were. How easy it would be for her to push me. I have to confess, when you said you'd been working with the FBI since you were 17, I looked for the signs. Keep her talking, I thought. Give her what she wants. The signs of what? I asked. Psychological trauma. Her expression was neutral, but I could feel her stare crawling over my skin. Working cases like Mackenzie's when you were still a child yourself, that's a lot to take on. Her tone was open, almost kind, and I remembered everything that Dean and I had concluded about our unsub from the files. You see yourself as an angel of mercy. The first time you saw someone, or helped someone commit suicide, they were probably in incredible pain. You probably loved them, and they might well have asked for your help. You know trauma. You recognize it. Some part of you craves it. Down below, I heard the door open and prayed that it was Leah. Just like I prayed that up above, Celine and the crisis negotiator and Mackenzie's mother had talked Mackenzie down. I really should be getting back to my patient. The psychologist took a step up, positioning herself above me. I said the only thing I could think of to stop her in her tracks. I killed my mother. You know trauma. You recognize it. You liberate the sufferer from it. She made me do it, but it was my hand holding the knife. I only needed another minute, maybe 2. I needed to distract her from the sound of footsteps running up the stairs toward us. I dream about it, I said. All of it, all the time. I'm going back to Mackenzie. Her voice was sharp, her movement up the stairs sudden. I followed and grabbed for her arm. I'd offered her a taste of my pain. It wasn't enough to keep her here, but I had to keep her away from Mackenzie. Let me go. Did you treat the Summers boy? I asked her, hoping to catch her off guard. What about the girl who killed herself? Were you treating her too? The response was chilling. What are you trying to imply? In for a penny, in for a pound. I'm implying that you wanted them to kill themselves, I said, buying precious seconds. But you overplayed your hand with Kelly. She jerked her arm out of my grasp, sending me flying backward into the wall. I steadied myself and prepared for another blow. It didn't come. It's a mercy, isn't it? I pressed. What you offer them, what you do, what you did to Kelly. The footsteps were right upon us now, but I couldn't afford to turn my back on the killer above me. She leaned forward. I had nothing to do with what happened to Kelly Peterson. I saw a flash of motion out of the corner of my eye. Leah rounded the corner, Michael beside her, gun in hand. He raised it. You, with the righteously indignant, yet distinctly guilty expression on your face. Hands in the air! The psychologist's gaze darted from me to Michael to Leah. Batman said to put your hands in the air, Leah told her. And while you're at it, repeat what you just said about the death of Kelly Peterson. Michael, age 12. 11 years ago. You're feeling annoyed. Michael Townsend offers the headmaster what passes for a 12-year-old's most charming smile. But also, secretly impressed with my hijinks. And is that anticipation I see? Michael gestures toward the headmaster's face. Asymmetrical lip tilt, dilated pupils. Is someone secretly hoping for a new auditorium? Tennis courts? A donation to the development fund, perhaps? Michael's father has a history of buying his son's way out of trouble. Michael has a history of making that difficult. It's a point of pride, really.
"What is it that you want, Mr. Townsend?"
The headmaster has that austere, "you will respect me" tone down.
"What exactly are you hoping to accomplish?"
There was a time when Michael tried not to make his father angry, but it's easier now that he does the reverse. Now, Michael sees the punches coming.
"What am I hoping to accomplish? Boarding school."
Michael makes a show of examining his own knuckles as he answers the headmaster's question.
"I'm hoping to get kicked out of this fine establishment, at which point my father will have no choice but to send me to boarding school. Possibly a string of boarding schools, very far away, very in favor of generous donors with troublesome offspring." "You want to be expelled?"
The headmaster seems to find that preposterous, and also somewhat concerning.
"I need structure,"
Michael declares, propping his feet up on the edge of the headmaster's desk.
"Discipline."
"I need to get away from my father."
"Feet, Mr. Townsend."
Michael leaves his feet exactly where they are. He hears the secretary enter the room behind him.
"Dr. Townsend will be here shortly,"
she announces. Michael can feel the muscles in his shoulders and back start to tense. He won't let them.
"Wonderful man, my father," he comments.
That gets a response from the headmaster. A subtle curl of his upper lip, too slight for 99% of the population to see. Michael recognizes the emotion for what it is. Distaste, not quite disgust. The headmaster doesn't think that Michael's father is a wonderful man. He knows.
"You're a school official."
Michael keeps his voice light and pleasant.
"That makes you a mandatory reporter, doesn't it?"
The headmaster stiffens.
"You should wait outside." "I will be thrilled to wait outside," Michael promises. "After I tell you a tale of great woe."
He pauses.
"You might want to pull up my attendance records as corroboration." "Mr. Townsend."
Michael meets his gaze.
"It would be unfortunate for you to have to report one of your biggest donors for suspected child abuse."
Michael doesn't enjoy thinking of himself as abused, so he doesn't dwell on the word. He relishes the moment.
"Almost as unfortunate," he adds, "as if I were to report you for not reporting one of your biggest donors."
Michael allows his feet to thump down on the floor and leans forward.
"Or,"
he says, his voice low,
"you could expel me, and I could refrain from telling you anything unfortunate at all."
Chapter 13.
"I didn't push Kelly Peterson. I didn't kill her. I didn't even know her."
The suspect's hands were in the air. I took one step away from her, then another, easing down the staircase toward Michael, and...
"True."
I whipped my head toward Leah, who shrugged. "She's telling the truth." My heart skipped a beat, and I looked for a loophole in the psychologist's statement. You didn't push Kelly. You didn't kill her. You didn't even know her.
"Then why, pray tell?"
Michael said, his gun still pointed toward her.
"Do you feel guilty?"
I don't. Head tilted downward, forehead fighting furrows, gaze averted, mouth drooping. Don't even get me started on the direction your eyebrows are arching. Michael lowered his weapon, most likely to put her at ease.
That combination puts you somewhere between shame and guilt. Even if that lovely narrowing of your eyes and the way your muscles just tightened suggest you're pissed, too.
You didn't push Kelly. You didn't kill her. You feel guilty. I tried to make the situation compute, but it didn't. Because the unsub we were looking for might have mourned victims, might even have felt remorse at the way things had to be, But that wasn't the dominant emotion in these kills. Neither was anger. Exaltation. Release. You didn't kill Kelly, I said, trying a new tack. You saved her. You didn't push her. You set her free. And you feel guilty because you weren't able to honor her passing the way you did with the others. No, the psychologist snapped. I feel guilty because when Mackenzie told me that Kelly was pushed, I didn't believe her. I feel guilty that I left my most vulnerable patient on a ledge that's getting slicker by the second for this. You feel guilty, I thought reflexively, because if you'd kept your mouth shut when I was on the verge of talking Mackenzie down, she might not still be up there. That wasn't me profiling the killer. That was me profiling the woman standing 2 steps above me, and that distinction was enough to send my heart pounding in my ears. As if from a great distance, I heard Leah confirm that every word that the psychologist had just spoken was true. Her guilt was centered on Mackenzie. You're the reason she's still in such a precarious position. A crack of thunder drowned out every other noise in the stairwell, but not the deafening roar of my own thoughts. But you're not the only reason. Mackenzie's psychologist wasn't the only one who'd spoken up and whose words had kept Mackenzie out on that ledge. You weren't the only person in that room with a background in psychology, motivation, mental illness, and the human mind. I had similar training, and I was willing to lay a lot of money on it that any crisis negotiator worth his salt had the same. You're the one in control here, Quentin Nichols had told Mackenzie. It's your decision. I'd assumed that he hadn't realized how Mackenzie would take a man in a position of power giving her control, like it was his to dole out. But in Quentin Nichols's line of work, he had to know what to say, how to manipulate a target, how to diffuse a dangerous situation. Or how to blow it up. You. The boards are off the windows. It's just you and Mackenzie now, separated by feet. Soon to be inches. Clearing the room before the FBI agent returned was the right call. You promised Mackenzie's mother that this would be over shortly. It will be. You wouldn't have chosen Mackenzie. She's younger than Kara was. Younger than you were when Kara died. But she's hurting. You can see that. You feel it. This child is hurting. She will always hurt. She needs you. You didn't arrange for Mackenzie to be standing on that ledge. You didn't befriend her, didn't mentor her, didn't lead her to this place. She's not like the others, but she needs you all the same. Needs this. And after Kelly, your heart ticks up a beat. You need this too. Chapter 14. I pushed past the psychologist and bolted up the stairs, aware that Michael and Leah were following on my heels, but focused only on Mackenzie. The ledge. It's slick now. You're shivering. What's he saying to you? What is he nudging you to do? I reached the 9th-story landing to find Mrs. McBride and the firemen standing to one side. Celine was on the other side of them, fighting with the door to the light room. It was jammed. The ladder was up. Mackenzie let us take the boards off the window, Mrs. McBride told me, breathless, glowing, and fighting tears. Quentin said she needed space, but she's coming down. They'd left her alone with him, and based on the trouble Celine was having with the door, he'd locked them out. Nichols isn't talking her down, I told Celine, keeping my voice low. We have to get in there, now. It took time for the firemen to cut through the door. Time for Celine to pull down what was left of the ladder. Time we didn't have. Per protocol, Agent Delacroix pulled herself up first. I followed a heartbeat later. Screw protocol. On the far side of the room, Mackenzie stood ramrod still on the ledge, the window open, the remains of the barricade scattered on the floor. Quentin Nichols stood between her and us, close enough that he could have pulled Mackenzie in, if he'd wanted to. "It's not your fault you're different," the crisis specialist was murmuring. "I'm betting that no one asked you, back then, if you wanted to be saved, if there was anything left worth saving." Lightning flashed behind Mackenzie, sending an almost tactile shock through the room. But Mackenzie didn't jolt. Her muscles held steady. As rain and wind beat at her, her eyes stayed focused on the man in front of her. "You told yourself that you came up here for Kelly, but, Mackenzie, if this were just about Kelly, you wouldn't still be out there." Quentin Nichols sounded tender. He sounded sure. "There's no shame," he said, "in taking control and deciding for yourself what you need." Control. Decide. His word choices were deliberate, and given the way Mackenzie's mind worked, terrifying. He shifted his weight forward, so slightly that it might not have been visible to his target on the ledge. She would have felt it all the same. "You know what she needs," I silently addressed Quentin. "You know that left to her own devices, she might not do it." "He pushed Kelly," I said, the one thing guaranteed to draw the unsub's attention my way, the one thing sure to break through to Mackenzie. "She wouldn't jump, so he pushed her." "I let her go," Nichols corrected, his attention still focused on Mackenzie, his tone still gentle. "Kelly was hurting. Some pain gets better, but some doesn't. What you've lived through, Mackenzie, the fight you fight every day, it's not going away." It felt like he was telling me that, not just her. "Part of you will always be in that shack," he continued softly, the sudden cruelty of that statement jarring. "And as long as you're there, the man responsible wins." "No," I said, my voice like a gunshot that ricocheted through the light room. "You win, Mackenzie, because you're alive, because you survived, because that son of a bitch is in the ground, and Mackenzie McBride is still dancing. Step back from the window." Celine had her weapon raised and aimed at Nichols. The crisis negotiator didn't even seem to register it. "Mercy is what matters. What you and only you can give Mackenzie. No one can take that away." "Your FBI friends think you'll come in," he told the girl on the ledge. "They think I'm the one keeping you out there. They think you're that easily manipulated, that you're helpless and weak, and if they tell you fairy tales, you'll believe them. But I'll tell you the truth." He paused, his expression tender. "I had a sister like you. Bad things happened to her, like you. I didn't understand then, but I do now. Some wounds can't heal. Some people can't heal." He took a step toward her this time, a full step. "But you don't have to do this. You don't have to end this alone." "He killed Kelly," I repeated, close to shouting now to be heard over the storm, to make her hear me. "He wants you to jump." No matter how much I wanted to, I couldn't tell Mackenzie that everything he'd said was a lie, because it wasn't. Even when wounds healed, the scars remained. She'd always feel them. But this was her body, her choice, her life. "Dance," I told her. She was on a ledge. It was pouring rain. That was the last thing I should have advised. But in that 4x4 shack, when she was just a little girl, Mackenzie had danced, hours upon hours, again and again, because it was her body. Because no one was going to take that away.
Don't listen to him, Mackenzie! Dance!
Slowly, she raised her arms, rounding them in front of her, then allowing them to part. She shifted her weight to one foot, the other toe pointing. For the first time since we'd entered the room, Quentin Nichols turned to face Celine and me head-on.
Hands in the air!
Celine barked.
On the ground!
On some level, I was aware that Michael and Leah had joined us, that Celine had backup, but my attention was focused solely on the man in front of me. The man who was close enough to Mackenzie to reach out and touch her. I didn't plan this, he told me. You didn't search Mackenzie out. You didn't groom her. You didn't lead her slowly toward this, day by day. You planned the others, I countered. You found them. You listened to them. I swallowed. You made them trust you. I volunteer, Quentin said, closing his eyes for just a moment, the expression on his face eerily wistful. I coach. I work with the youth group at the church. He didn't just have one point of access, one set of hunting grounds. He'd cultivated several. There have been others, I stated, reading into that. Over the years. I'm there for them. I help when I can. And when I can't, he bowed his head, the motion bordering on ceremonial. I offer release. Behind him, Mackenzie stopped dancing. Her eyes meeting mine, she sank slowly to a sitting position. She's coming in. I tried not to show even a hint of relief. What I do is a duty, Nichols was saying, not a pleasure. It's mercy, I said. I had to keep his attention on me. I couldn't let him turn around. For a moment, I thought it was working, and then, without warning, he whirled. He saw Mackenzie. She froze. Her legs were dangling into the room. She was almost safe. You will save her. He moved. I lunged forward, knowing even as I did that I couldn't get to him before he reached her. A gunshot went off. My ears ringing, I hit the ground. The impact knocked the breath from my chest. I looked up, forcing my eyes to the ledge. Mackenzie was sitting there. Nichols was down. Celine approached him, her freshly fired gun still in her hands. Taking use of the cover she provided, Michael knelt to feel for a pulse. I forced my eyes from the two of them, pulled myself up off the ground, and stumbled toward Mackenzie. She slid off the ledge into my arms. Beside us, Michael looked at Celine and shook his head. Nichols was gone. I wrapped my arms around Mackenzie, blocking the dead body from view, but she fought my hold and stepped aside. She wanted to see it. To see him. For the record, Leah managed to pull Mackenzie's attention away from the killer's corpse. When he said that what he tried to do to you, what he did to the others, wasn't a pleasure, Leah spat in the dead man's direction. He lied. Leah, age 12. 11 years earlier. The girl sits down, and her mother brushes her hair. Long, even strokes. You're lucky, you know. The brush stills. Then the woman wielding it corrects herself. Blessed. Blessed because the leader has chosen her. Blessed because she's favored by God. What a joke. Sadie. Her mother says the name she was given at birth, the one he knows. This is a blessing. It would have been easier if she couldn't hear, plain as day, that Mama believes that. Believes in him. The girl turns. She needs, just this once, for her mother to see the truth, to see her. I don't have visions. Truths get more potent the longer you keep them from your tongue. There's years of power in this one. I never have. He doesn't have them either. He's a liar. I'm a better one, and I will literally rip his eyes out of their sockets the next time he comes to my bed. She was 9 the first time. With the right lies, the right truths, she put him off. Until she was 12. This isn't you. Her mother backs away, frightened, but the girl called Sadie, the girl who used to be Sadie, knows the truth. After all, her mother was the one who told her, all those years ago, pretend it's not you. Whatever happens, pretend that it isn't happening to you. Sadie is good at pretending. Leah is better. After all, she's pretended to be Sadie all these years. I love you, Mama. Leah can make that sound and feel true without having to worry about whether or not it still is. Even though you're planning on telling him everything I tell you, even though you'll stand back and let him put me in a hole in the ground, even though you'll watch me starving and dying of thirst and look straight through me until he gives me permission to exist again, I love you. Her mother is wearing a bracelet made of thorns, penance. She removes it, tries to force it around her daughter's wrist. Leah lets her. As the thorns bite into her flesh, she lets her eyelashes flutter. Her face visibly softens. She dons the Sadie mask. You did well, Mama. The words are gentle, and they sound true, true, true. Leah is leaving tonight. She knows now that no one will be coming with her. She can feel the last bit of Sadie flickering inside of her like a candle, ready to die. She lets Sadie caress the side of her mother's face one last time. Your faith is pure. Leah knows how to sell a lie, and 9/10 of it is telling people exactly what they want to hear. This was a test? Her mother is breathless. Questions can't be lies, but Leah hears the hesitation, the uncertainty. Some part of Mama has always known what the leader does to those, like Sadie, whom he calls blessed. But the others? They aren't like Sadie, aren't like Leah. They don't know when someone is lying, when the leader is spitting falsehoods. They can't lie nearly so convincingly themselves. This is the truth. There is blood on Sadie's hands, on Leah's. One lie, the right lie, can doom a man. She wishes a lie could save her mother. He's going to kill you someday. All of you. Leah won't be here to die. It was a test, she confirms gently. She leans forward, touches her forehead to her mother's. Tell me you love me. It's Leah who turns, not Sadie. It's Leah whose hair her mother is brushing. She'll always be Leah now. I love you, Sadie. It would be easier for Leah if that were a lie. Chapter 15. Worst thing about this case. Dean sat at the end of my bed. It had taken 3 days, and Briggs calling in a favor, for my boyfriend to get 24 hours of leave from Quantico. Given that Briggs had also had to grease the wheels to excuse Michael's better to ask for forgiveness than permission trip to Maine, I was starting to suspect that someone at the FBI Academy was going to be read in on the Naturals program fairly soon. The worst thing about this case? I took my time to feel the weight of the words. The worst thing is knowing that Mackenzie could have died because I got it wrong. I'd left a vulnerable 12-year-old alone with a killer whose specialty was exploiting vulnerabilities. I knew better than to make assumptions. I knew how easily one wrong mental turn could lead even the strongest profiler astray. And yet, Dean took my hand in his and turned it over so that he could trace his thumb along the lines of my palm. Are you sure that the worst part wasn't why you got it wrong? Being a natural didn't make a person infallible. I knew that, but I'd started working with the Bureau young enough that I also had a healthy amount of experience under my belt. Normally, when I made mistakes, they were smaller. Normally, I self-corrected. I didn't need to turn too much of my profiler's eye inward to know why it had been far too easy for me to see a psychologist as the enemy. I'd thought from the beginning that the woman didn't and couldn't understand what Mackenzie had been through. Just like the Bureau psychologist I'd been assigned when I was a teenager had never understood me. You think I should see someone? I let my fingers curl slowly into a fist, and Dean cupped his hand around mine. I think it might help. His lips brushed white-hot over my knuckles. As much as I'd fought to ignore my own scars, I'd never tried to make Dean forget his. I had never, and would never, pretend that the worst moments of his life didn't matter. I knew and accepted that behavior, personality, environment wasn't a one-time calculation, that everything we did and experienced became a part of us. I knew that the things that happened when we were young had the longest to burrow in. Without our particular childhoods, none of us would have been naturals. Leah wouldn't have been Leah without growing up in the cult. Sloane had always had an affinity for numbers, but isolation had turned them into a coping mechanism. Michael's sensitivity to emotions developed as a survival skill, and Dean understood killers because he'd been raised to be one. I'd long since accepted the role that my own childhood had played in making me a natural profiler. Why was it so much harder to accept that there were other traumas whose effects had formed me just as much? Quentin Nichols had a sister. I leaned back against the headboard, my fingers intertwining themselves with Dean's. It was easier, always, to talk about someone other than myself. She killed herself when she was 18. Quentin was 4 years younger. He was there. Dean didn't make that a question. His family blamed him for not being able to stop it. That was what I'd been able to piece together after the fact. According to people who knew him, Nichols always said that was why he went into crisis negotiation, to save lives. But in reality, I closed my eyes, just for a moment, knowing that Dean deserved more than me talking about the case because it was easier than addressing the elephant in the room. In reality, I continued, opening my eyes to his deep brown ones, Nichols convinced himself that he had saved his sister. He was there for her, in the end. He told her it was okay. He let her go. Dean's head tilted down toward mine. He gave her what mercy he could. Dean and I had always acknowledged that to do what we did, a person needed a bit of monster in them. That was why he understood Nichols, why I could see the motive and understand it myself. I killed my mother. I'd said those words to Mackenzie's psychologist. I could say them to Dean now. I was holding the knife. I felt it go into her chest. You couldn't stop it, Dean told me. The knife was in your hands, her fingers wrapped around yours. I laid my hand on his chest. There was a spot, just inside the rib cage. You need to talk to someone, Dean told me. I closed my eyes. I know. For almost a minute, I sat there, listening to the sound of his heart, feeling it beat beneath my palm. Best part of this case. Dean always knew exactly when I'd reached my limit, exactly how to distract me. He laid his hand on my chest. I could feel the warmth of it through my thin white t-shirt. I could feel him feeling my heartbeat. The best part of this case was Mackenzie. I didn't even have to think about my answer. Before she came in, she danced. She was going to survive, just like she always had. You talked to her parents? Dean asked. I nodded. She'll come to us when she's 15, if she still wants to. Mackenzie's parents were hedging their bets on their daughter joining the Naturals program, but the profiler in me knew that their daughter wouldn't change her mind about this. She'd spend the next 3 years convincing them that normal wasn't an option. Not for her. Not anymore. Without warning, Dean's mouth descended over mine. I rose up to meet him, my hands on either side of his face, my legs wrapping themselves around his body. I wasn't normal. Neither was he.
The new girl can't have my room.
The voice that issued that statement was completely matter-of-fact and utterly unbothered by what Dean and I were up to on the bed. We split apart. Laurel tilted her head to one side. Do you prefer the screams? She asked Dean softly. Or the blood? There was a single beat of silence, and then Leah sauntered into the room behind my little sister. I give that a 9 out of 10 for delivery, Leah told Laurel. But a 10 for creepy content. Laurel shrugged, her expression unchanging. I try. Most of the time, Laurel tried not to be creepy, and failed. But my sister was strangely at ease with Leah, who was already training her to use her unnatural solemnity to her advantage, and to spot lies.
The new girl can't have my room when she gets here,
Laurel repeated emphatically.
I don't care if it's not for another 3 years.
Technically, my grandmother was the one raising my sister. Technically, our base of operations was not Laurel's house. Technically, she didn't have a room here, but when we'd returned from this case, we'd found the bedroom Laurel sometimes stayed in completely decorated with ponies. I belong here. That was what the expression on Laurel's tiny face said. Her mouth, in contrast, addressed Dean.
I was just messing with you about the blood.
She paused.
And the screams.
I glanced at Leah, and she shrugged, which I took to mean that statement was mostly true. Come on, short stuff. Leah tweaked the end of Laurel's ponytail. Let's leave Angsty and the brood here to their special alone time, and I'll teach you how to convince your teacher that the dog really did eat your homework. Before Leah could actually leave Dean and me to our own devices, her cell phone rang. Video call, she told us. It's Sloane. It took all of 2 seconds before Leah had helped herself to a slice of the bed. The moment she did, Laurel took off. Hey, Sloane. Leah answered and angled the phone screen so that Dean and I could see. The 9mm Luger was designed by a German weapons manufacturer in 1902. Sloane's greeting was unconventional, if not entirely unexpected. In 2015, the FBI shifted to using a 147-grain 9mm Gold Dot G2 for ammunition. Leah took one for the team and responded to that statement. Either you're in the middle of weapons training, or you've spent the past 48 hours with Celine. Special Agent Delacroix had fired a shot in the line of duty. She'd saved Mackenzie's life and taken the life of a killer. There was a process that had to be followed in the wake of an event like that. Celine had to be cleared, legally and psychologically, before she could return to the field. Celine needs me. Sloane fiddled with something, though I couldn't quite make out what she held between her fingers.
No one has ever needed me before.
We all need you, Dean told her. Sloane was our light in the darkness.
Dean, Sloane said very seriously. I hope this is not oversharing, but Celine needs me in a very different way. Knowing Sloane, I half expected her to share exactly what that very different way entailed, possibly with graphs, almost certainly with precise descriptions of angles and body parts, but she spared us the explicit details and opted instead for another statistic. Did you know that 46% of Texans meditate at least once a week?
You don't say, Leah grinned.
Sloane frowned into the camera. I just did say. And Cassie? I looked into those brothers in Texas, and the thing is, they aren't. Aren't brothers? I asked. Aren't in Texas, Sloane corrected. At least, they're not there anymore. The whole family picked up and moved with no warning. Even weirder, I can't figure out where they went. And if you can't figure it out... Michael plopped down beside Sloane and squeezed into the frame. There's a very good chance they're off the grid. A 97.4% chance, Sloane clarified. Exactly, Michael declared. Now, on a somewhat unrelated note, adorable onesies for the Sterling Briggs Wonder Twins? Yay or nay? He held up what appeared to be a custom-made infant onesie, emblazoned with the words Special Agent Baby. I was thinking of putting something inappropriate, but humorous and endearing, on the back, he clarified. There were 9.5 weeks left until Michael and Sloane would be home. 9.5 weeks before I could look at Dean and know he wasn't leaving the next day. 3 years until Mackenzie would join the program. Who knew how long to find the brothers? But Briggs and Sterling's twins were expected to make their arrival early, and that meant any day. I vote yes on the onesies, I declared. All in favor? Sloane asked formally. I leaned back against Dean, and Leah leaned against me before we all chorused in unison. Aye.